I think I just wanted my vocal performances to be really great, and I think that's kind of where a lot of it came down to getting my vocals right and my guitars right, and then adding everything else.
Sweet. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much again for doing this.
Thanks for having me. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I'm Adam, and this podcast is about you and your journey in the music industry. And we'll talk about the new album you have coming out. I love the couple of singles you put out thus far.
Okay, great.
Cool. I
Have you
did.
heard the record yet?
Yeah, I have a stream of it. I didn't know how
Okay,
deep you
great.
want me to get into
Yeah,
it
yeah.
because I just know that it's coming out later this year, so I didn't know. I didn't have a
Okay.
release date or anything. So, but I
All
had a
right,
chance to
great.
hear it. It's a fantastic album.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were born in where? Memphis, Tennessee, but did you grow
I
up there as
was,
well?
I was grew up in Washington, D.C.
Okay. So you
Yeah.
born in Memphis. When did you move to Washington, D.C.? Were you really young?
I'm not, I didn't spend, I only spent a year in Memphis. So
Oh,
I really am from Washington, D.C. pretty much.
okay.
But I had a family in Texas. So I spent every summer in a small town in Texas called Vernon.
Oh, cool. What part of Texas is that? Where's it close
West
to?
Texas, like 3 hours west of Dallas.
Oh, very cool. I have family in like Plano, Texas, which is like Dallas Fort Worth.
I've
Yeah.
heard of Plano near Dallas. Yep.
Yeah. That's awesome. So between Texas and DC, what was it like growing up? I mean, at least in DC, it sounds like you spent more of your time there.
Yeah, I mean, I was primarily there, but I was able to get uh, kind of a pretty good dose of what it was rural America was like, kind of
Mhm.
West Texas, and then lived in Washington D.C. as well. It's kind of like more of a political town.
Yeah, for sure. What about music? Do you come from a musical household?
No, I don't. Just listen to a lot of records, pretty much. There was a lot of music around in the car, probably like everybody's house at that time.
Sure. And did you get into like piano or anything like that at an early age, or like when did you start
I mean,
learning how to play?
I was enamored with music at an early age, and tried to play the trumpet was my first instrument. And we could take musical instruments home from our school
Mhm.
in elementary school, and so you could pick an instrument that you could want to play if you wanted to, and I picked trumpet, so that was my first one.
Did you play that for a while? I mean, in the new song that you just released, there's a dope trumpet
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
beginning.
yes, yes, yes. I realized pretty quickly how connected you had to be to play that instrument. And it was not something that I don't think musically my evolution and music understanding it was at that point yet. So, and then I picked up the guitar when I was like 13. A friend of mine had played lived in my neighborhood, and we just started jamming out a little bit, taught me some chords, and that's where kind of the genesis of that came. And I didn't find myself particularly proficient at that either.
Mhm.
And I started writing poetry, and I sang in school choirs and things like that. And then I got a drum machine and started in a 4 track and started kind of messing around with you know making demo tapes,
Oh,
which was
was it just would you play guitar on them, or was it just your
I would play like
vocals
really
and
basic stuff, and then I got into like, because music, understanding music was such a mystery to me. I felt like it was like an ordained thing when I would see people, because I would see people who could really play.
Mhm.
In my high school, there was some like kind of prodigious type talent and singing, and also there was a trumpet player there. I was even related to Dizzy Gillespie, and
Oh,
you
wow.
know, so I mean, you had uh, a range of stuff that I thought it was more like uh, something that had to be gifted in that level to you. And I saw enough people, so I didn't feel particularly like that. And then when I started writing lyrics, I felt, wow, this is something that just kind of happened that was kind of special. That I felt it kind of came from an interesting place. And then once I really fell in love with listening to records, and then that kind of led to me wanting to produce records and make records. And then I got a sampler, and kind of had no idea about anything about a song or the structure. I just listened and would be mystified. I remember listening to Willie Mitchell uh, instrumental album, the guy that produced Al Green. He had a record company called High Records, and he did his own solo records. And listen, a friend of mine from Austin, Texas, had turned me on to this record, and I just, how did they do this? And I got a sampler and started kind of understanding like bars and all these things that you kind of, in sequences. I didn't even know what a sequence was, and I had friends with similar gear, and I'd call them up, or if I knew somebody had one, I'd call him up. I'll read the manual.
Yeah, back when you couldn't just YouTube it. You have to actually break the manual out and
So
like
there's
physically try to learn it.
a lot of people I leaned into pretty heavily, but it was so I kind of started understanding the structure of songwriting, and then started doing spoken word over
Oh,
some
cool.
sampled stuff, and then started bringing melody into it, and then really had learned the drum machines and the samplers and all that kind of stuff, and made kind of like a demo with that kind of stuff, and then put it all down, because I was like, man, I can't even just sing my grandmother's song, so I just kind of picked up the guitar and back up and started tooling with that one string at a time, and kind of coming up with some melodies, and then the other instruments would come in my head, and kind of work from a production that way, and then incorporated my drum machines back into that style.
Oh, okay. Very cool.
Yeah.
And you played in what, in a group too called Basehead early on? Was that before all this, or were you doing kind of them at the same time?
I started my demos and stuff like that early.
Okay.
So that was prior to Basshead, and that's actually how Michael Ivy heard my music, was my first demo.
Oh,
And
wow.
he asked me to join his band, and because he was about to go on the tour, and I had nothing to do with his first record, and very little to do with his second record. He was Michael had just a really great vision of what he wanted to do, and a voice and a point of view, like really a brilliant artist.
Mhm.
So I got to kind of go in the studio with him, and he had a independent label or a major deal at the time, so I kind of got to learn a lot from him.
And then and you played with him for a bit, and then you ended up getting a major label deal soon after that, right? Or right, pretty
Yeah,
quick.
yeah. I mean, in the late nineties, and then it didn't. That first record didn't come out, and then I had to get another record deal, and then finally get put out a record in 2002.
Yeah.
My debut record.
And a massive album too. I mean, coming out, you had a gold single or a gold record on the album right away. That's
But
huge.
no, it took about 20 years for that to go
Oh, did it
platinum.
really?
Yeah, that was actually kind of a big flop. The first record was. Um,
I didn't realize
but
that it took a minute for it to then to generate enough sales for the gold.
yeah, I mean, by the time Universal took it off the shelf, it had sold 15,000, and it's probably sold 400,000 since then.
Wow. That's wild. Yeah, I used to work for a radio station in San Diego, and we used to do this show in the morning called Wake and Break on Saturday mornings. We would play a lot from that. I mean, we would play
Uh,
record songs from that record. I remember.
oh, the first album.
Yeah, the first album. I think
right, right.
the drummer kick. I think we played quite a bit.
Thank you. You're the one
Yeah.
that you're the one that played it. You
We
probably
played it. I don't know. I mean, I played it a
you
handful of
you were
times, so I don't think I sold you
you were
400,000
you
copies.
you you were probably one of the only stations to ever play that record.
We played it quite a bit. I mean, our
That's
program
dope.
director at the
Thank
time, or like the assistant program director, was a massive fan of you and actually reggae. So he put on this show that was kind of all similar sounds, and it was a rad record, and it was a cool show. But we put that song on.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You ended up going independent, started your own label, a couple albums in.
Yep, I did 3 records with majors, so I still have, those ties and have done about 4 or 5 on my own.
What was it like going from, the major label world to then doing it yourself? Like, was that a hard decision to make, or?
Well, you know what it was is like I usually when I signed with the different companies because I had different situations, and then the companies would go under. Like DreamWorks kind of didn't exist anymore when I
Oh
signed with
yeah.
them. I moved to Arista, and then Arista dismantled and kind of got bought by Sony and moved, and all the people got fired. And so it had happened a couple times, and then even when I went, and then I they put me at RCA, but essentially it was just it was the people that I was attracted to in all those situations. Like I had really good record men, really good people that you could call and play a record for, or else you would know they would listen to something to have good feedback and good like. So I think that was to me that was my what I loved about being part of that is being part of a conversation with people that had made big records before. Like that's a
Mhm.
huge asset. So it just and it got to the point where it was just like, I was at RCA and there wasn't really anyone that I could trust in the RCA staff that really knew about like classic records like kind of my prior people had. And I just decided I've that was the one because I didn't really get on the radio and I didn't get these press and all these other things. I really was attracted to the expertise of some of the record men that were involved in the companies that I signed with.
Mhm. But you had a chance to like you self-produced a lot of those first albums too, right? Even though you're on the major.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
that's pretty. I not because sometimes, or at least nowadays, they try to be like, oh well, yeah, let's put you with this person or put you with this person. Um,
Well,
did
they
you have?
did that. They did that back in the day as well. I mean, pretty much. But I'd made my own demos to start out with, and kind of had that as a record. Even the first record, they asked me to work with Bob Power, or asked me to work with the producer on it, and it ended up, I'd done drummer already and that kind of thing. So that was like the big song on the record. And If There's Love was done, and so I kind of think that they had Lenny Waronker had the confidence in me as a record maker, and he'd kind of done enough people from Prince to Randy Newman to uh, you know Neil Young to kind of have that knowledge about what it would take to make a record. So I
Mhm.
was lucky in that sense that I wrote my songs, and I that was what I got into. I didn't get into it for like to be an entertainer.
Just you preferred the songwriting aspect of it all.
Songwriting and record making,
Yeah.
that was what really got not even the live performance. Like the live performance was a huge like Achilles heel with me.
Is that right? Do you remember
Yeah.
having like were your early shows you just weren't it just wasn't as it
I
just
just
wasn't something you
wasn't
drew
that's
to it?
not like I didn't never have that feeling like, oh, when I got on stage, I knew this is what I would have to be doing for the rest of my life. I love hearing those stories and I just wasn't. I wish I was, I wish I knew the second I got on the stage, I was like, no, I knew that, I remember looking myself in the mirror and saying, what have you chosen to do? You've chosen to do the hardest thing that, by going in front of people and performing something. It was frightening to me.
Mhm. But I mean, it sounds like even when you were growing up and younger, getting the drum machines, getting the 4 tracks and kind of creating your own records and demos that way. That was what really, it seems like that's what really drew you into music anyway. So it's like going, and then it makes sense to me that you enjoy that part of
Yeah.
the
And I
business
don't even
more
think when
than.
I got it, yeah, when I got that, I didn't think that's what I was gonna be doing for like I just thought it was cool. I thought drum machines were cool. I thought they sounded cool. Like, how do you do this? It's,
Mhm.
oh, the demos turned out pretty well. And then I guess I did start to pursue to become an artist shortly after that because I caught the music bug.
Mhm. Yeah.
But I
And you
didn't realize like the importance of being able to perform.
because yeah, it sounds like the back end stuff was more of your what you wanted to do, and then you kind of like, okay, well now you have these records, they're doing well, you got to go play them to the
Yeah.
masses.
Or to get a record deal, you had to play live kind of thing.
Right.
So
Well, I love obviously what you're doing with the new album. I want to talk to you about that. Just real quick on kind of the previous 3 records. Like, was obviously you had an album in 2012, One Lovely Day, and then about 6 years later you did the next record in 2019. Was there kind of a like, what would you say like a milestone from that 2012 record was, and then Heroin and Helicopters?
I had a daughter in that time, and I was just touring a lot, and quite honestly, I've been kind of beaten down because I felt like I'd made, 4 or 5 phenomenal records that kind of didn't get noticed. And so it's kind of like, all right, let me restructure how I want to figure this out, and it was also just kind of an inspiration thing. Was I
Mhm.
inspired? Maybe a lack of inspiration, because I'd started touring. And once you start touring, you don't have that autonomy anymore. You don't have that, early on, I mentioned him earlier, but Lenny Walker is like, write as many songs as you can because once you start making records, it's harder.
Mm.
And so it there's a reason why, that creativity kind of, you lose as a writer your autonomy, you lose kind of being the fly on the wall, you lose kind of the things that thought you were struggling with. They might be financial, or you might have a pretty girlfriend now, a little pocket full of money.
Yeah.
All these things that kind of, you know, that inspire you as an artist are not your daily life routines anymore. You're
Mhm.
jumping on a bus, doing a show. Your energy for that has to go into a whole different energy, which is performing. And so uh it's not the same as woodshedding and writing songs and making records.
Yeah, I could imagine. Yeah, you just being on the road that much and having to put your all into all these performances night after night after night, and then driving to a different city. Like, yeah, I have so much respect for artists and musicians, and like I couldn't even imagine doing that. I mean, as a kid, I was like, "Oh, this is amazing," and then I watch it, and I'm like, That's so much work." Like get up
Yeah,
every night, and then in the meantime, having a label or even just fans like, "When's the next album coming out?" You're like, "Oh, like I gotta." Sit down and write. Like, this is wild.
yeah. And I think, writing is life experience. And if your
Mhm,
life experience is in that bubble of kind of, let's call it what it is not the realist kind of reality. It's not it's a very surface reality where most of your conversations are about you.
mhm,
You know,
mhm.
there's a lot of questions from people because people are, if you meet people or whatever, they're intrigued and everything, but that's not a normal scenario. I think
Right.
more people get to witness somebody going on the bus and, you know, hear a song, somebody plays a busker on the side of the road or a conversation at the coffee shop or whatever, and it's not attached to your, profession.
Right. Right. Because yeah, you're just in a different setting for the
Yeah,
most of it.
yeah.
Um,
So I
going
think
into
that's what. Yeah,
sorry, go
sorry.
ahead. No, no, no,
No,
no.
no, no.
No, no, no,
So I
you
guess to
go.
make a long story short, I think one of the things that happens with inspiration is when your energy shifts in this industry from creating to maintaining what you've created. That can be a difficult thing. And I was like really lucky with this new record where I feel like, wow, I'm inspired again. I'm making great records again. And I was like, I didn't think that that was possible.
Well, yeah, the new album's amazing. So
Yeah.
real quick, stepping into like 2020, I mean, you put out the Pull of Niagara Falls 2 years, I guess 2 years ago now. It's 2023. Was that an album you had finished going into the pandemic, or was that a record you wrote then? And then how does that
I
lead into these new songs?
just recorded that acoustically in the house, and then I'd written some of those songs a long time ago that I kind of never got out. I wanted to kind of put some of them in there, and then there's a song called "The Time Comes Around" off the Pull of Niagara Falls, and then I did a version on the new record of that with like instrumentation and orchestration, and so that kind of led to that. But um the Victory March is more about a celebration of life and kind of enjoying the gift of life that we're given, because it's been easy to forget that, in this chase that we live in out here, uh, being born in kind of a very functional and economically progressive country, that you get thrown into a chase at an early age, and so it's kind of like taking a reprise and understanding the gift of life.
Hmm. So was there like, was that song off of the Pull in Niagara Falls what kind of sparked the inspiration? I mean, you said you got inspired again
Well,
to write.
Pull of Niagara Falls was more of a dark record, because a couple of the songs came from Shotguns, which I made in the late '90s, and that's the record that didn't come out.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, so no, there was a transformation that happened. I stopped drinking. I have had a long-term relationship, on and on, relationship with um, my daughter's mother that ended, and all good, as far as like amicable, but so a lot of life changes happen, and
Mhm.
also just kind of looking at my motivation at what I was doing, and I had to really answer or ask myself some deep questions on my motivation into what I was doing with my life.
Mhm. Well, congratulations real quick on the drinking thing. I'm I'm a member of the of AA. I don't know if you go the 12-step route, but yeah, I also don't drink, so I know the difficulty
Yeah,
there.
yeah, I was having it got such a, it was, I don't, when you perform, it was an interesting thing, because it just got, and I can drink a lot and I enjoy drinking.
Mhm.
So it's a situation of the next day and all this stuff and all these things to do and being on the road. And then when I looked into it, it was really kind of more of a mind thing, because when you perform, your adrenaline goes up. And I did some studying on what happens with, there's a really interesting article in the Guardian about how there's some kind of chemical thing going up that gets your adrenaline going, and then
Uh-huh.
you finish performing, and you want something else, and it's kind of a, so they did, it's a chemical reaction to where, I think that it kind of leads people who do the arts to substances. And now there's also a question of whether you're predetermined because of the life you lived, uh to be kind of, or to what you experience in life, of whether you will be, have problem with drinking or drugs or anything. But I thought it kind of made me, it put a good perspective on it and what was actually happening. And I'd been trying to stop for a while, and I was like, either I'm gonna go to rehab, I'm gonna go to the jungle and do some iboga treatments.
Mhm. Yeah.
or
Which is, yeah, I've
or
heard a lot of people actually doing, the ayahuasca
yeah.
thing. Yeah.
And I, there was something called iboga that's even more powerful, like the granddaddy of that. People who've been getting off of heroin with it. Obviously with shamans and everything. But I didn't. And then I'd read up on all that kind of like rehabilitation rehabs and stuff.
Mhm.
But I'd also read that they weren't always very effective, and essentially, if you weren't ready to quit, and I've been praying about trying to stop for a while, so I felt like I really, wanted to,
Mhm.
and it wasn't. But I don't feel like regret or anger that, I know that some of the things that I did affected, my life, as far as like, you know, drinking that much, because it's just like I was drinking more than I should have.
Mhm.
So, but I don't look back and feel like, oh, this was an awful time in my life. I actually look at it as an experience that I learned from a great deal from, and I was able to, glad I learned from it.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's amazing that you stopped. I mean, I feel like a lot of people in the program and stuff will talk about, it comes to you if other people make the decision for you, it's not gonna stick, right? You need to make it yourself. And it sounds like you got to that point where you're like, I had my fun, I did it. Like it's move forward now. I love that.
Yeah.
That's what it took me, dude.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that's amazing.
Congratulations to you as well, man.
Oh, I cheers
Yeah.
to that. I mean, that's so cool. I love to hear these stories. But so
I
coming into
didn't want to get too personal with it, but I just like, there was a change in my life, and that was one of them.
well, I appreciate your,
Yeah.
your honesty and your vulnerability. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
With just to, kind of stay on this new record for another minute here. I know you're short on time, or you're in the studio. I don't want to take up too much of your time. But going into this album, I mean, being able to do a song from the Pool of Niagara Falls and kind of adding the bigger elements, and you said that was more of a strip. I mean, obviously a stripped down version of those songs that you had written. Like going into this, did you have a lot of ideas, or are there certain instruments that you wanted to use that maybe you haven't used before?
I think I just wanted my vocal performances to be really great. And I think that's kind of where a lot of it came down to, getting my vocals right and my guitars right, and then adding everything else. And I had kind of a vocal breakthrough at a vocal teacher who had been telling me the technique for years. She passed away right prior to COVID. I
Oh,
was sitting
wow.
here in the studio, and it just clicked what she'd been telling me all this time. And so a lot of like kind of mystical things happen around the record. So I think you can sit with a song sometimes and not have the vocals right. So I was just like, let me get the vocals right with the guitar and the click, and then we'll bring everything else. So I think that was kind of a different approach, even though I'd done that on some songs in the past. But the majority of this record was kind of cut, with me and a click track.
Wow. Well, it's again, I love the record. I love I really think it's cool that you talked about having the trumpet be the instrument you brought home, and then on the new single, it's like it drives the beginning of the song, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just such a cool, and it's such a cool thing.
Yeah, it was just like I heard that calling, it was like a calling, it feels like, and it opens the record. It kind of makes me feel like, like Gabriel is kind of like a single trumpet line, and the trumpet player delivered it beautifully.
Yeah, it sounds great. I didn't know if I was gonna ask you if you played that part. If you
I
ever
didn't
kept
play it. I sang it to him. I was like, ba ba ba, ba ba ba. Now, the fact that he actually nailed that is really harder because the tone. Because sometimes when you play, if you don't write down trumpet,
yeah, the
like
good
horn
notes.
parts and everything, if you do that, some guys can't adjust. But this guy was amazing, pro. Um, we had a whole session of horn players in here for that song, and I was like, "Hey, can you do this thing?"
Uh, did you record the record where you're at right now? Or this
Yeah,
is
at the
just a different.
village. Well, I did some at my house. Most of it was done at my house, but I recorded a lot here at the village. I've recorded a lot of records here, which
Wow.
is studio in Santa Monica. The old Masonic temple that was kind of bought by Fleetwood Mac and
Oh
a
wow, I
long
didn't
time
know.
ago, and then sold. So they bought this after rumors.
Oh, really? And
Yeah.
then yes, and was it just their studio and then they ended up renting out rooms later down the line or
I think they sold it or something to
yeah.
somebody else, and it became, like there's all these plaques around here that none of them are mine, but
Until this album comes out.
until this one, we're gonna give them one. We're gonna give the village a nice plaque.
Hell yeah, you are. Well, I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for doing this. I'll let you get back to work. I have one more question. I want to know if you have any advice for aspiring artists.
I always say, listen to and follow your first instinct. That's the hardest thing to do. And I think that a lot of times what's inside you is better than you think. People want to know who you are. They don't want you to be somebody else. They don't want you to be the this version of that person, or like you have your own unique experiences that only you can share, and only your vulnerability and your emotion can get there. And it's like, don't be scared. That's the scariest thing to do, is to find where your thing is. And secondly is really understand it, to enjoy the process. That's one thing that I wish I could tell myself, is to enjoy the process. And the third thing I would say, which is actually the first thing, is you will need some kind of spiritual foundation, uh, because um, the higher you get, the less breathing room there is, and that will be a great help. Whatever it is, prayer, meditation, uh, you know, belief in God, whichever one you choose to. But I think there is some I think there is a deep thing with, some kind of peace of mind, and that, whether it's meditation or prayer or anything like that. I think it's important to have a spiritual um, foundation,
Amazing.
and
I love that.
know within it's you. It's you. It's not somebody else that can teach you. It's not a guru that's going to teach you. It's not another artist that's going to help you along the way. It's, you're going to have to really find that within yourself, and confidence within yourself, which is the hardest thing, because artists have normally come in with confidence issues.
For sure. Yeah. I 100% agree. I appreciate your time. Yeah,
Yeah.
the imposter syndrome type. I get, I would imagine that'd be a hard thing to kind of shake, but
Well, I mean, I think most artists, if you really look at it, they come from a situation where normally they're probably, how they were raised wasn't the most healthy environment. That's why they're having something to say,
mhm.
and um, and that's why people also identify with them, because people feel, all of us have had, everyone's had our stories, and everyone's had our good and bad times. And I think that when you get that opportunity to do something like that, and you know, there's still self-doubt, and that's why it's pushing you to the spotlight, because you know you don't want to fear it,
Mhm.
so you're going for it. And I think that, but there's self-doubt, and you were kind of almost forced by something different, to push you in that direction. So um that's something that, fear is what holds us back in life. And I think that, I would just say that to any young artist is to have that spiritual foundation, and believe in yourself, because all the other people, the gold records, the good reviews, the pats on the back when you know when your successes happen is really only going to matter if you feel that.
Bringing it backward.